He wrecked my reputation in one email to the whole department, but he never got the chance to do it twice. I came up through the newsroom alongside Reed because our fathers had worked the same beat decades earlier and stayed friends until they retired. Reed and I were bound together from the first day of the internship. One week he'd slip me a lead on a story. The next he'd accidentally scoop me on something I'd told him in confidence. Early on, I let it slide. But as we climbed, and the bylines started to matter, I realized I'd been quietly looking up to him. He'd come back from a fellowship polished and sharp, the kind of writer editors fought over. Everyone assumed he'd run the place someday. His treatment of me never changed, though. Generous one moment, cutting the next. He'd defend my copy when the senior editors picked it apart. Then a day later, lead the pile on himself. I never knew which Reed I'd get, so I kept my head down and worked harder, telling myself that if I was good enough, he'd finally just be decent to me. The year we both went up for the same staff position, it got worse. He'd question my sourcing in front of the room, mimic my pitches, sigh when I got assigned a good story. I'd drive home swallowing it. My wife kept asking what was wrong and I kept deflecting because our families were close and I didn't want to detonate all of it. Then one night, Reed called me, half drunk and shaken, and apologized for everything. Said he'd been awful and couldn't explain why. I forgave him instantly, embarrassingly grateful. And in that loose, unguarded state, he told me something real. That his whole confident act was hollow. That he'd been gambling badly for 2 years. That he was buried in debt and terrified and faking it every single day. I told him I was glad he trusted me. I thought we'd finally turned a corner. The next morning, he acted like the call never happened. A week later, right before the promotion decision, he sent an email to the entire department, copied the editors, copied HR, claiming I'd fabricated a quote in a recent piece. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that sticks to a reporter forever. People stopped meeting my eyes at the coffee machine. 2 editors pulled me into a room to discuss my process. Reed almost looked sorry when he passed my desk. Almost. Then he went back to his terminal like nothing had happened. I spent a sleepless night pulling my notes and recordings, ready to defend myself. My wife was ready to call his father that instant. I stopped her with a tired, steady smile. "Don't," I said. "I know exactly what I'm going to do. I didn't lie about him. I didn't fabricate anything back. What I had was the one thing he'd handed me himself. The promotion decision was in 3 days, but that wasn't what I focused on. I went to our managing editor, Nadia, the day before, not to fight the fabrication charge. I did that separately, with my recordings, and it fell apart in an hour. This was different. I told her, quietly and honestly, that I was worried about Reed, that he'd confided something serious to me about a gambling problem and real financial trouble, that I'd seen him unraveling, and that I didn't feel right staying silent when he was clearly drowning. I said I didn't know what to do, and I needed help. I meant it. That's the part Reed never expected, that the secret he'd used to make himself vulnerable to me, I would never turn into a weapon. I'd only ever use it to get him help. Nadia went quiet, thanked me, and spoke with Reed that afternoon. What I didn't know was that 2 others had already noticed money going missing from a shared travel fund and been too unsure to say anything. My conversation was what tipped it. They brought in the HR lead, not to fire him, but out of genuine concern. And it came out that Reed had been quietly falling apart for 2 years, while everyone admired his output. He didn't get the promotion. He got a leave of absence and a counselor instead. He was livid at first. Accused me of betraying him, of sabotaging his career, of using his confession against him. I let him finish. Then I said, "You used that email to make me small. I used what you told me to keep you from going under. That's the difference between us." He didn't have an answer. Months later, he found me by the elevators, steadier, clearer, lighter somehow. He said his counselor had asked what finally forced him to face it, and he'd realized it was the one person he'd spent years undercutting. He apologized, a real one this time, sober, no audience. Reed writes for a paper 2 states over now. We're not close, but every year on the anniversary of that email, he texts me. It just says, "Thank you for not being like me."